Why did anyone unlucky enough to haul an M60 into combat end up with a love-hate relationship with it? Some veterans swore by the gun, saying it saved their lives more than once. Others loathed it so much they would do anything to ditch it and pick up another weapon. In this video, you'll learn things you probably didn't know about America's movie star, machine gun, and decide for yourself after. World War II, the U.S. Army was looking at what the Germans had done with their general purpose machine guns, the MG-34 and MG-42, and liked what they saw. American infantry faced a logistical nightmare. Every squad carried a jumble of weapons and calibers: Thompsons, M1 Garands, M1 carbines, bars, and the heavy M11919 teams, and resupplying the correct ammunition across a front was difficult. The German MG-42 had proven that a single weapon, used in different roles and quickly converted between light and heavy mounts with a fast change barrel, was an excellent solution. The US did not yet have such a flexible weapon, and they set out to build one. Designers borrowed from the MG-42's feed system and from the FG-42 paratroop rifle's ergonomics and pistol grip layout, then added American touches. The result was essentially an attempt to combine the best features of both into a single machine gun. Soldiers would later give it a colorful, and not always flattering, nickname: the Pig. As the general-purpose machine gun concept took hold, NATO decided its members did not all need to use the same gun, but they would benefit enormously from a common cartridge. The 7.62 5-1 NATO round was chosen, so Allied forces could support each other more easily. By 1956, after extensive development, the U.S. Army fielded a gas-operated machine gun that fired from an open bolt, used disintegrating link belts, and featured a quick-change barrel system, at least on paper. In practice, the quick change and some other features would not always live up to expectations. Compared to older Browning designs, the new gun offered clear advantages. It weighed roughly 23 pounds, heavy for days of jungle patrolling, certainly, but light for its class at the time, about 10 pounds less than the M1919, more compact, and it maintained an equal or higher rate of fire. Standardized in 1957, it was intended to replace the bar, the M1919, and even the older water-cooled M1917. It became the squad's principal source of firepower, aiming to do for U.S. infantry what the German machine guns had done a decade and a half earlier. Troops trained with it through the tense Cold War years, preparing for a possible confrontation in Europe. Instead, the M60's first major combat experience came in Vietnam, where both its strengths and its flaws quickly became obvious. Even during testing, the gun experienced a significant stoppage about once every 2,000 rounds, a reliability issue that, for whatever reason, was not fully resolved before it saw combat. To picture what it was like to use the M60 in action, let's look at the stats and how it performed in the field. It fired at roughly 600 rounds per minute, enough firepower to be decisively effective while helping to avoid consuming ammunition and overheating too quickly. That rate translated to about 10 rounds per second, devastating when used correctly, but it also made the operator an immediate priority target for the enemy. The gun could be fired from a bipod or tripod. Soldiers adapted quickly, learning to fire from the hip or on the move when necessary. In dense jungle, where the M60 first saw heavy use, it proved controllable and terrifyingly effective at suppressing enemy movement. When Marines and soldiers first received M60's in Vietnam, many units still used Browning M1919s. They soon found the M60 was a better choice for jungle warfare. Lighter, easier to handle, and more suitable for mobile patrols. Early combat reports praised the weapon for its firepower and for turning the tide in engagements. But being the squad's main source of sustained fire also made the machine gunner's role one of the most dangerous in the patrol, rivaled perhaps only by tunnel rats and similarly hazardous tasks. Why so dangerous? Because the M60 drew attention. Its 7.62 NATO cartridge penetrated vegetation far better than the 5.56 fired by the M16, and rounds retained lethal energy well beyond the canopy. The enemy quickly learned to both respect and neutralize the machine gun. Silencing it was a top priority. M60 gunners were trained to unlimber and lay down heavy suppressive fire during ambushes, often positioning themselves at the front of the squad. That made them prime targets, and the squad's pointmen and radio operators were similarly exposed because the enemy aimed to cut firepower and communications first. Commanders would even warn officers and radio operators to stay clear of the gunner whenever possible because a single burst, grenade, or rocket could eliminate multiple critical personnel at once. The distinctive sound of the M60 and the dust it kicked up while firing from a bipod made the gunner easy to locate. There's a persistent and gruesome statistic that an M60 gunner had only 7 seconds to live after opening fire. That sounds like an exaggeration meant to frighten newcomers, but it captures the grim reality. Gun crews were conspicuous and vulnerable, yet supremely effective at breaking enemy attacks when the weapon functioned. Before we discuss the malfunctions that earned the M60 much of its ill repute, let's review how it was used in the field. Modeled loosely on German W-Putte machine gun teams, the M60 was intended to be crewed by 3 men in theory. The gunner carried and fired the weapon. The assistant helped with reloading and changing barrels. And the third, the mule, carried ammunition and sometimes the tripod. In jungle patrols, the tripod was rarely practical, so the mule's duty often amounted to hauling heavy belts of ammunition and other gear, placing him close to the most dangerous people on the patrol. Ammunition was a major logistical burden. The M60 could consume 600 rounds a minute in sustained bursts, and firefights could last for hours. To avoid running dry, each man in a squad typically carried 1 or more 100-round belts, while the gun crew might split an additional 200 rounds among themselves. A 100-round belt weighed roughly 7 pounds, so the team might carry thousands of rounds for the gun on top of their personal weapons, rations, and water through hot, humid jungle. The weight added up quickly. The jungle also made keeping belts clean and links straight a constant job. Less experienced units sometimes slung their belts across their bodies for quick access, the iconic Rambo look. But after days of crawling through vegetation, the belts collected dirt, twigs, and bent links. Once firing began, those contaminants would cause jams at the worst possible moments. Soldiers improvised, packing belts in claymore bags, fashioning ready ammo holders on the gun, wiring C-ration tins under the feed tray to guide belts, and even adapting radio backpacks and flexible chutes from downed helicopters to hold hundreds of rounds feeding into the gun. Reconnaissance teams sometimes took drastic steps, shortening the butt and barrel to save weight and mounting the modified M60 to create a terrifyingly loud, flashy weapon that could make a small force appear much larger during suppressive fire. Early in the war, troops mostly liked the M60, but the conditions of Vietnam, heat, mud, and constant grime, exposed weaknesses in a weapon that used stamped metal and some plastic parts. Malfunctions often appeared when the gun was most needed, such as during an ambush. Problems ranged from stoppages in combat to failures that only revealed themselves when the trigger was pulled. The most notorious fault was the runaway, the weapon firing uncontrollably, typically due to worn trigger sears. After a gunner released the trigger to stop shooting, the gun could continue to fire until the belt ran out or the assistant physically stopped the feed. In combat, this was more than an annoyance. It wasted precious ammunition, risked friendly casualties if the uncontrolled bursts strayed, and could cause overheating that would destroy the gun or injure the crew. Another recurring issue was tearing the rims off fired cartridges, leaving spent cases stuck in the chamber and jamming the weapon. Clearing such jams often required removing the casing with a knife or driving it out from the chamber's opposite side. In early versions, the barrel latch could snag on vegetation and allow the barrel to loosen or fall out while moving through thick growth, a terrifying prospect. If you only noticed when you tried to fire. No wonder M60 crews learned to be religious about maintenance, cleaning and oiling the gas system, reinforcing fragile parts like pistol grips with duct tape or wire, and improvising barrel handles from coat hangers or other scavenge parts so hot barrels could be swapped more safely. The quick change barrel system made sense on paper. Change the barrel every 10 minutes of sustained firing, or roughly after several hundred rounds, to prevent cook-offs and catastrophic failure. In practice, gunners usually swapped barrels only when they began to hear signs of cooking off, the sound of rounds firing in the chamber. And then they had to unlatch a red-hot barrel, pull it free without a proper handle, and insert a fresh one while under fire. Severe burns were not uncommon. Later improvements added a proper handle to the barrel and fixed some of these hazards. But earlier models and worn-out guns continued to give trouble as the war went on. The M60 wasn't confined to infantry squads. It saw widespread use on helicopters, boats, trucks, tanks, and armored personnel carriers. Helicopter crews adapted field M60s until a specialized M60D variant was developed for door gunners, featuring a higher rate of fire, spade grips, improved sights, and helicopter mounts. Riverine units mounted M60s on fast patrol boats, and transport convoys and improvised gun trucks installed multiple M60s in armored boxes for convoy protection. The weapon's versatility was undeniable. Still, by the late stages of the conflict, the M60's age and design limitations were becoming clear. Better solutions arrived over time. The Belgian FN MAG, adopted in U.S. service as the M240, gradually replaced the M60 at the front lines. Heavier and more robust with an all-steel milled receiver, the M240 could sustain far more rounds without the kind of structural failures that plagued the M60. Nevertheless, the M60 persisted in some roles for years, in special operations on certain vehicles, and even in refined domestic variants such as Denmark's M60E6. In the end, the M60's story is a mixed one. A weapon that offered weight savings, mobility, and brutal firepower, yet one that demanded meticulous care, invited improvisation, and exposed its crews to extraordinary risk when it failed. That combination, dependable when maintained and unpredictable when worn, beloved by some and despised by others, is exactly why its users kept such a complicated relationship with